Are the Taliban returning to Kabul? The Taliban have captured the rural areas, but the Afghan army is pushing back. After 20 years of fighting, the US is set to end its military operations in Afghanistan by August 31. Since May 1, when US troops started withdrawing from Afghanistan, the Taliban have made rapid territorial gains in the country. They have taken control of dozens of northern districts and several of country's key border crossings, mounting pressure on the Ashraf Ghani government. In a conversation moderated by Stanley Johnny, Jayant Prasad and Avinash Paliwal discussed the Afghan situation, India's option and the prospect for a peaceful settlement. First question. The American media reported that there is an intelligence conclusion that Kabul could fall within 6 months once the US troops are out. Do you think that's happening? Answer of Jayant Prasad. That's perhaps somewhat exaggerated. The Taliban have made gains. What is remarkable is that they have made gains in the north and west. They have taken border posts along Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, and two main border posts with Pakistan. But to say that the Taliban will occupy Kabul before long is perhaps an overstretch. The Afghan the Afghan army has begun to react and reorganize. The Afghan Defense Ministry has a new chief, Bismillah Khan. So priorities will change. Instead of stretching all over the place, they will concentrate on the border crossings because these are also the customs collecting points, and they will also concentrate on main trunk route and major cities. I don't think the Taliban will make great progress in occupying major cities. Taliban have taken large tract of rural areas and are now poised outside the cities, but they will remain thus till the beginning of September, when all the foreign forces pull out. September, October, and November will be the big test for Afghanistan. If the government can hold off the Taliban during that period, then anything can happen next year, because then the Taliban will know that taking over Afghanistan is not as easy as it might have appeared some time ago. If they realize that, then this peace process may have a better chance next year. Question 2. How did Afghanistan come to this point? Can we say that the US could have negotiated a better deal with the Taliban that would have also addressed the question of political settlement between the insurgents and the government, or did it just want to exit Afghanistan? Answer by Avinash Paliwal. There are two aspects to the possibilities that could have existed between the US and the Taliban when they began talking in Doha a few years ago. One is the war, the way it has been executed, and the effect that execution on any potential negotiation. The American and larger security umbrella provided by West were not fighting in comprehensive, well thought out long term campaign to support the current state in a fundamental way. This debate about whether they were there for counter-terrorism purposes or nation building was never resolved. The West was essentially torn in what it actually wanted. That had a structural impact on how it went ahead with the dialogue with the Taliban and what it could have potentially reaped out of that. This taken me to the second point of the negotiation itself. These were two moments in past when the Americans were serious about talking to the Taliban directly. One was sometime around 2012 during the term of the government of President Hamid Karzai in Kabul. That was perhaps a little premature because they had given a deadline by which they wanted to leave. So they talk when they began or when they were supposed to begin in 2012 really put off the Kabul government in a political sense, and there was a lot of pushback by President Karzai that you can't enter into a direct communication with the Taliban because that would fundamentally undermine the political experiment in Afghanistan that had begun at the end of 2001. During the next round of conversation beginning 2017-18 under US President Donald Trump, the ground shifted domestically within America. The Americans did not want to continue fighting and losing soldiers and resources in Afghanistan given the strategic priorities that they had with an Chi- assertive China in the horizon. There was also a clear sense that given how they actually fought this war aimlessly, perhaps they could not have bargained better than a withdrawal agreement. This was not a deal in which they were settling the fate of Afghanistan. The Americans made sure that they would extricate themselves without further losses and in the process legitimize the Afghan Taliban diplomatically for the world to deal with. The outcome has been that the Taliban are being assertive. They have been using the talks with the Afghan government in Doha as a tactic to assert themselves by time and continue pressing for their legitimacy the world over. If there was any appetite for a political solution among the Taliban, I think we would have seen the importance of that, but unfortunately, we haven't. Third question, Ambassador, how do you look at the recent developments from an Indian point of view? What does India want in Afghanistan and what can it do to achieve those objectives? Answer by Jayendra Prasad. What did India want in Afghanistan is very simple. Our short term strategic objective will be served fully if Afghans have a government that stands on its own feet in terms of decision making, who it can be friends with, cooperate with, and so on. All these years we were faced with the incessant experimentation by Afghanistan's military allies. They were not just the US and NATO, but also other countries friendly with the US. When I left in 2010, there were members of 44 armed forces in Afghanistan. Even if the coalition that supports the Afghan authorities today falls to half that number. That is enough to sustain an independent Afghan government. I don't think we were looking for an Afghan inimical to Pakistan. Rather, we would welcome good relations, but Afghans, at least in my time, and I hope in the future as well, will refuse to be subservient to anybody. I had a little bit of hope when a high level Afghan team went to Doha to talk to the Taliban delegation led by Mullah Baredar. But Abdullah, who led the Afghan side, came to Delhi and said that nothing had changed with the Taliban. They are playing for time and they are playing a game for good cop, bad cop. Mullah Baredar and Suhail Sheikhin, the spokesperson of the Taliban in Doha, keep talking about peace. If they want peace, they should stop killing Afghans, whether they are from the armed forces or civilians. The message from the field commanders and military commanders of Taliban is completely to the contrary. This is disquieting for India. We will have to be dexterous and support those Afghan communities which are willing to fight for the right. An Afghan constitution, Afghan sovereignty and independence, and Afghan republicanism, which is all there in the present constitution. Fourth question, Dr. Paliwal, you have argued that India should halt talks with the Taliban. Why should the Taliban engage with India? Answer by Paliwal. When I say India should engage with the Taliban, the idea is not to give in to the Taliban's demands or give up on India's existing allies in Afghanistan. It is that India must have channels with Taliban representatives, whether they are in Doha or elsewhere in Afghanistan, to make sure that in any eventuality of a Taliban takeover either in Kabul or different parts of the country, India's interests are not harmed. And this is keeping in perspective the fact that a stronger Taliban is not necessarily going to be subservient to the Indo service intelligence. This is something that needs to be appreciated as a long term phenomenon. This is in the space of principal agent relationships, where the principal is Pakistan and the agent the Taliban. Political interests and strategies don't always align. There is considerable discontent within the Taliban about its relationship with Pakistan. That is what I mean when I say that India must have a channel to open to at least be aware of what the thinking is within the Taliban. Second, the Taliban have always been interested in talking to India between 1996 when the Taliban came to power and December 1999 when the IC 814 hijacking incident happened. There have been multiple signals by the Taliban leadership to India and other countries to engage with them. At that point, the sole desire was to be officially recognized by the rest of the world. They had official support only from three countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Pakistan, and they wanted a wider set of relationships in the international fora. That calculus remains still today. From a regional perspective, the Taliban are very clear that they do not want to get in between the India Pakistan crossfire, and I think that is the message that they have tried to send. The question is whether they can sustain that kind of an outreach given the dependence on Pakistan. In the light of Pakistan's clear messaging that it would not want Indian presence to be as sizable as it had been. That's a test for the Taliban, and that's something that we need to see whether they can pull off if they come to power. There is no clear sign in practice that it will happen. This is concerning, but there are constituencies within the Taliban who would want to have a stable relationship with India, even if powerful factions, especially the Haqqani network and its allies such as Jaish-e Muhammad and Lecture-e-Taib, will not let that happen. So it's not just a dilemma for India whether or not to talk to Taliban. It is more acute dilemma for the Taliban to desire whether to talk to India and to what extent. Question: suppose the Afghan government holds on to its position and serious talks begin, what kind of a political settlement is possible? Jayant Prasad: there are serious discussions between the Taliban and Afghan government. Despite the breakdown in Doha, they are continuing to talk to each other. But whether these talks will be productive or not, we don't know. The Taliban are playing for time. They postponed the discussions on the future makeup of the Afghan state, that of the constitution, of how Islamic it would be, because Afghanistan is an Islamic republic. What the people in Afghanistan don't want right now is for it to become an Islamic emirate. So, the other fundamental contradiction is that the Taliban, in the best of times, will not accept democratic election easily. But if they were to accept it, then the Afghans would be ready to compromise on the constitution. I guess because it would mean the end of 4 decades of fighting, and every Afghan wants peace and stability. So the problem is just as I feel that Pakistan is very important to a future settlement in Afghanistan. It's very difficult to imagine that it would change course, especially when it thinks that the Taliban is winning. Next question is to Dr. Paliwal. Dr. Paliwal, what are your views on how to end the conflict in Afghanistan? Answer. I just hope that the Kabul government is able to bring about some political coherence within the coming weeks. There is clear intent being demonstrated by Kabul in terms of standing up to Pakistan, in terms of not letting the law morale of the Afghan national security forces bog them down. They have been making progress on the ground, but they are also fractured from within. If there is a stalemate in the next 4 to 6 months, I hope both sides and Pakistan realize that it is time to figure out a political solution because because the pain that will be inflicted by violence in Afghanistan will not just hurt Afghanistan but be detrimental to Pakistan's social, economic, and political health.